Today we're going to have a look at part 2, chapter 11 of Never Let Me Go. This chapter focuses a lot on the relationship between Kathi and Ruth. So let's get right into that. Immediately at the beginning of the chapter, we hear from Kathi, and she kind of discusses how her relationship with Ruth has progressed at the cottages. Ruth and I would still find ourselves sitting side by side on my mattress, sipping our hot drinks, exchanging our deepest feelings about our whole new life, like nothing had ever come between us. And what made these heart-to-hearts so possible, you might even say what made the whole relationship possible during that time, was this understanding we had that anything we told each other during those moments would be treated with careful respect. Now, we find out in a couple of pages, once you get to page 129, Kathi describes the two Ruths. So Ruth's has two separate personalities, we'll say. There was one Ruth who was always trying to impress the veterans, who wouldn't hesitate to ignore me, Tommy, any of the others. And then there was the other Ruth, who sat beside Kathi at night in the little attic room at the day's close, legs outstretched over the edge of my mattress, her streaming mug held in both her hands. That was the Ruth from Helsham. So it's kind of interesting how we see Ruth depicted at the cottages. If you were confused at all, Kefers is the caretaker at the cottages, and he brings the kids things to do. He gives them food, collects their trash, things like that. Now, the conditions we mentioned before are pretty terrible. There aren't many rules, and the veterans actually leave during the day and don't really discuss where they go. They can kind of just leave when they want. Now, I kind of pulled this barn here to give you an idea. They mentioned having to have multiple blankets put on them. They're very cold, things like that. Now, it's interesting. Ruth kind of talks about to Kathi her collection box. So remember back at Hailsham when they have all of these items they collect from the exchanges. Ruth wants to give them to Kefers, and he kind of says, this stuff really isn't that good. But remember that this stuff was already hand-me-downs to begin with. So the items that these students got in the exchanges were things that people didn't want anymore. So Kefers kind of looks at them and says, yeah, no one's going to buy that. But he can see the look on Ruth's face and kind of takes it back because he knows that this is all they know. That is all they have known forever. We're going to get back to Ruth in a bit, but I kind of wanted to touch on the pornography mentioned in this chapter. Now, remember, these students left Hailsham when they were 16, and now they're living the rest of their known life in these cottages. So we don't really understand why yet. We know that they're donating their organs, so we might want to assume that this is because they still need to develop. We don't really know. But Kathi takes an interest in pornography, and not for the reason that we think. Typically we talk about the negative aspects of pornography, and it is. It doesn't portray women in a very positive light, but Kathi looks at these magazines to look at the women. Now, she mentions that these women were portrayed in a very sexual way, but she's not looking at their bodies. She's looking at each model's face, and she flips through the pages very quickly just to see what they look like. Now, at this point, we don't understand what she's looking for yet, but she's very intrigued by the women in these images. And remember, they don't have TV, they don't have movies, so for her to be able to see these women is interesting. It's people she has not seen before. So I kind of want to get back to Ruth a little bit. So Ruth really has this desire to fit in. Remember in the last chapter, she spoils the endings of the books. She has her collection box that she gets rid of. She's very eager to attach herself to memories of others because she has no memories of her own. So examples of this would be spoiling the plot of books that she probably hasn't read. Um, and she goes overboard trying to assert herself into Chrissy and Rodney's memories of Martin. Um, Ruth likes to present herself as this all-knowing uh, person of interest in these secret groups and implied meanings, but in actuality, she knows very little, or at least values very little. She's eager to fit in with the veterans that she doesn't really develop any identity of her own. Um, Her throwing away the collection box um, kind of seems like this way Ruth tries to attach herself to others because she saw that none of the veterans had them and she wanted to fit in. It's interesting because I mentioned here DNA flaw. Was the design of Ruth flawed in some way? This kind of touches on the sci-fi aspect of the book. Um, I want you to think about that a little bit as you read into her character. The lives of these young kids is through the flashback of Kathy's memories. I can't help but get this pastoral feeling from them, and pastoral means nostalgic. So you're reminiscing on your past. Um, Ruth and Kathy's relationship can be heartwarming in a way, but not because they're best friends and look at each other's thoughts, but the text makes their interactions almost organic. And I'm going to read a passage from you from page 128. It was in many ways a typical evening session for us. We'd brought up mugs of tea and we were sitting in my room, side by side on the mattress, our heads slightly stooped because of the rafters. So many of us are blessed to have family and friends all in one place, and we know what having family feels like. But for the rest of us, it does remind us of simpler times, which is the exact definition of what a pastoral text is. What I wouldn't give to talk to my best friends back home face to face over a drink receive those funny, tactful, encouraging, wise words, which we hear from page 128. Um, so it's the simpler times. Kathy now, remember, this is a flashback. Kathy is a carer now. She works with the donors, so she's kind of just reflecting on her life and her past. I kind of mentioned, we mentioned Norfolk before, but I added it again because Norfolk is where all of the lost items go. Um, so I just wanted to remind you, remember they define this as the lost corner of England. This kind of leads me to a discussion of what does this mean to be human? Um, Now, it's interesting, and I want you to think about this particular sentence here. This was from page 126 in my book. Since each of us was copied at some point from a normal person, there must be for each of us somewhere out there a model getting on with his or her life. So at this point, we don't know what that means, but I kind of discuss here this existential question or these ontological questions of who am I? What is a human? What kind of human do I want to be? Now, ontological means the state of being. But it's vital that we ask ourselves these questions. And I think literature does a good job of helping us define that. We connect to characters in the book, we connect to their personalities, so we can kind of discover a little bit about ourselves while we're reading and these characters are discovering themselves.